All right. Good morning, everyone. Happy Thursday. Welcome to the Northern Forest Bird Network webinar series. Today, I'm super excited to share that we have Sarah Kendrick joining us. I know Sarah through the Migratory Birds team with Region 3 at Fish and Wildlife Service. And it's just been a joy working with Sarah the past few years and learning all that she knows. Sarah is a migratory bird biologist with Fish and Wildlife Service for the 8 states of the Midwest region. Sarah acts as a coordinator for full annual cycle conservation and migration ecology. She's a Midwest point of contact for Motus Wildlife Tracking Network, which I believe she'll be talking a lot about today. And she serves as the U.S. co-chair of the Partners in Flight Science Committee and serves on national and international committees to address threats to migratory birds and work to inspire conservation actions to slow the decline of declining bird populations. Sarah is a Missouri native who enjoys birding, hiking, and soaking up nature with her husband Kip and their 9-year-old son Abram. So thank you, Sarah. I'll let you take it away.
Thanks, Jamie. Appreciate you. Who wrote that long intro anyway? Thank you everybody for having me. I'm going to talk to you today about this large-scale wood thrush Motus tagging project we have. And when I was planning, or when Jamie asked me to speak about the project, we both acknowledged that while wood thrush isn't a super high priority northern forest bird, it still does occur across some of the region up there, and we have states participating in the project up north too. Um, I will caveat to say that my brain is in a lot of different places right now. My husband broke both of his arms this week. Yesterday was the first day that I was back in the office for a few hours, and so I apologize if I'm absent-minded or miss a beat or two. It's been a long few months, but I'm sure all of you know all about that. So thanks again for the opportunity, Jamie, and for the invite. Go ahead and get started. And Jamie, can you give me a thumbs up? We have like 45 minutes, right? And then we'll do some questions
Yeah.
after. Okay.
Yep. And if you have any questions, throw them in the chat. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, great. All right. So in every presentation, there's always someone who knows nothing about Modus and someone who has done Modus before. So it's a very wide gradient. So I always try to touch on it a little bit to at least tell people what it is and how it works. So the Modus Wildlife Tracking System is a project of Birds Canada in Ontario. It's at modus.org if you want to learn more. Modus means movement in Latin. That's one of the most common questions I get. And it works using very small VHF radio tags. So if any of you have done any radio tagging before, transmitter tracking, it's the same concept. It's just a little bit different and collaborative, which I'll talk about here in a minute. And it uses teeny tiny tags on our smallest migratory animals, birds, bats, even large insects, because they can go as light as 0.2 grams. You can see the white tag on the back of that female cerulean warbler there. The antenna goes down the tail, and then it works off of an array of Motus receivers placed on the landscape that wait for Motus tagged animals to pass within range. It needs to be a Motus digitized tag. And then when the bird flies within range, it captures that detection and stores it on the unit or transmits that detection to the Motus website to their database. The beauty of Motus is that it's collaborative, so all Motus stations placed across the globe all work together on the same radio frequency. So all of these yellow dots are active Motus stations, and there's about 2,100. I just checked that this morning. I give this talk very often, every few months on some aspect, and I always have to check the number of Motus stations. It's always increased by 100 or 200 every month. So it continues to have massive growth. And this is a map of where in the world there are active Motus stations. So you can see the US clear, very densely packed in the northeastern states, around Ontario, of course, where it all started. But this map looks very different than it did about 6 or 7 years ago. I'll show you that here in a minute. So this is how it works. This is our footless Swainson's thrush. I don't know why it doesn't have feet. But I made this slide in 2018 when I worked for the Missouri Department of Conservation. I've been in this job for about 3 years, but I was the ornithologist in Missouri for the state. And I tried to drum up support for Motus to build a Motus network of receivers across our state because back then there weren't any. So I made these slides back in 2018, and at this point, they're just too funny and hideous to change because they make me laugh. And so this is our footless Swainson's thrush. Here's our bird with a Motus tag. Here's our Motus station, though it doesn't always have to be a tower. You can put antennas on anything. Our bird, the range is about 15 kilometers, about 10 miles, with perfect line of sight with no obstructions. So our bird is flying within range. Oh, it flies within range and gets a detection, and then the detection is stored either on the Motus unit or again transmitted to the Motus website. Here's another depiction of that. So here's our bird with our tag on, and aren't these slides just amazing? Anyway, so that's a concept. If a bird leaves on migration and flies within range of any active Motus station, it's detected. It is detected, and that detection is stored or transmitted. So when we look at, here we see animations from two separate studies on Swainson's thrush in particular. You see the bird there in the middle. And on the left side, this is a project of Camila Gomez with Selva, and she tagged Swainson's thrushes, tracking spring migration on the left, and we see tracks of fall migration on the right. Oops, hold on, I gotta start this one. Whoops, it had started. Okay, are they both starting? Hold on, sorry guys. Okay. So this fall migration on the right from 5 different tagging locations across one region of the bird's breeding range. So you can see how these two studies across both sides of a species range on the breeding and non-breeding can really help to get a broad view of where these birds are migrating and their routes, migration timing, how long it takes them, where they may be stopping over in between. And so these two studies were not coordinated together. You can see that they occurred years apart. But with every Motus project, we're kind of each collaboratively contributing pieces of the puzzle of these species migration ecology that tells a hemispheric story. And so we've seen phenomenal Motus growth of the stations globally. So between 2016 and 2023, which I know my numbers are a little bit out of date, and it's more than this now, the receiver stations increased over 450%. And within the Midwest region alone, just our 8 states, including northern forests, we saw over 600% growth. And so this was what the Motus landscape looked like in 2018. There was our very first station in Missouri I was very proud of that was at our conservation department headquarters. I took lots of pictures of guys climbing a tower. It was super boring, but it was very exciting for me after years of trying to drum up support in the state. And then this is 2024. And so they changed the size of the dots, so it really messes up my transition slide. But you can see that look out west. I mean, there's hardly anything out there. And then look now. So this is in the span of 6 years, and it continues to grow. And it's just amazing, the growth. My point here is that when I was starting the Motus network as in Missouri, as anybody who is an advocate for putting up Motus stations, when you ask people for money to fund Motus stations, people want to tag birds right away because that's the fun part, right? So I've had to learn to try to sell just the stations, right, without the tagging, because way back in 2018, you remember this picture, if we deployed tags, it wouldn't have been very responsible because we didn't have enough stations for those birds to be detected on. And so we really had to do a lot of legwork, convincing people, trying to get budget funding. Huge shout out to the Missouri Department of Conservation who put up a lot of money over a series of years to place these stations. We're trying for 2 latitudinal arrays, which is what we advocate for. I'm a Midwest point of contact for Motus, and when people reach out and say that they have funding for a lot of different stations, we try and encourage them to do latitudinal arrays and along major waterways, especially up north around our Great Lakes and things like that. So my point here is that 6 or 7 years ago, a project of this scale, like the Wood Thrush project, would not have been a possibility because we didn't have enough stations up to try and make our chances much higher for detections. So here are a few tracks of birds detected going through Missouri. Of course, I'm very Missouri-centric, even though I'm a biologist for the whole region, but I'm located here in Missouri, and I've just been talking about Missouri Motus for a lot longer. But these are just a few examples of birds that are tagged up north where you guys work. You can see this whippoorwill detected on multiple stations in the state as it moves through the state, almost showing a complete one-way route of this bird's fall migration from breeding grounds where it was tagged on migration through our Ozarks in southern Missouri and Arkansas, and then tagged likely near its wintering grounds in Mexico, because whippoorwills overwinter in Mexico and the western portions of Central America. And so the Swainson's thrush on the right shows that birds that can hold a tag that lasts over a year, like thrushes, we can get repeat movements throughout the full annual cycle. So you can get amazing tracks that show general migratory pathway timing and connectivity, but you can see the different tracks there. So I just took this screenshot just moments ago before we started this talk. I like to put in a little bit of regional information for the folks that I'm talking to about Motus. And so what I did is the Motus website, motus.org, has a dashboard that has been in beta testing for a while, but it's a lot more fluid now. But you go on there and you can search by project number. All of this information about Motus and all of these tagging projects are kind of open access on the website. You remember the map I just showed you with the yellow dots on it? You can click on any of those yellow dots, see the station information. You can click on a list of birds that have been detected at that station, and then you can click on each bird's ID and see a track of that bird, of all the detections it's gotten. You can spend a lot of time on the Motus website. But you can also look by region. So I went in by region, you can see here, and I chose Minnesota. And it shows that this is just species detected, not number of individuals. But I forget the number of individuals. It's on the previous screen, sorry. But it was in the hundreds. But there have been 24 species detected in Minnesota on any Motus station in Minnesota. There have been 16 species tagged within Minnesota to be tracked elsewhere. And then there's 18 stations in the state. So you can click on different regions or states like that to get an idea. And it just shows you these white tags are where the bird was originally tagged. So this is a map of tracks within Minnesota. Sorry, this is a map of detections of birds that were detected in Minnesota and where they were originally tagged with the white icons. So you can see all the way across Canada, even down in Colombia, some of these birds were tagged, and then they happened to pass through Minnesota. So it really just shows how important our Midwest region is, as well as northern forests for, being great stopover location for many, many species. So that's great, Sarah, but why wood thrush? Why this species? So I'll just get on my soapbox here for a brief moment to say that we always want Motus projects and Motus tagging in particular to inform conservation and management of the species. Having been in the Motus game for quite a while now and being the point of contact, like I said before, people contact me and they're like, we want to put some Motus tags on birds. We're writing a grant. We're going to put in for 10 Motus tags. And, we're really excited and they want to support the network. And I'm like, whoa, 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 10 tags really isn't going to tell you enough, right? You need to know which species. You need to know why you're picking that species. You need to think through whether Motus is the technology that's going to tell you what you need to know. And so we have to think through all of those things, always, always, always guided by a research question. And we also want to think through whether the species merits tagging and whether it has major knowledge gaps that Motus in particular can fill, or whether a different technology is better. I'm a huge advocate of Motus, but I know it's not the silver bullet. It doesn't tell us everything, but it can tell us a lot for certain types of species. So, as you all likely know, wood thrush is an iconic eastern deciduous forest breeding bird that has experienced declines over the past 20 years. In some portions of its breeding range, it's kind of leveling out according to long-term trends, but in others, it's still declining. But it's remained a conservation priority for much of that time on the breeding grounds, and it's also kind of a flagship species for non-breeding work in the neotropics as well for forest breeding birds. You can see there, it's on all the lists. It's even on the Upper Miss Great Lakes JV list, which I did not include on here, sorry. But it's on the Partners in Flight watch list. It's a watch list species. It's on the Road to Recovery tipping point species. It is a Fish and Wildlife Service priority on the Birds of Conservation Concern list. Again, it's in the Upper Miss Great Lakes Land Bird Plan as a priority species for forest. And it's a priority in 25 states. It's a species of greatest conservation need in state wildlife action plans. It's on regional SGCN lists, which have been created for the Northeast, Southeast, and Midwest. So it's on all the lists, is my point of that slide. And just as a brief reminder, again, this is what our Motus network looks like. I forgot to take this slide out because I already talked about it before. Um, I'm going to briefly cover a few projects that we've initiated in the Midwest region. So as you can see, I'm wearing a Missouri Department of Conservation hat in this picture. So at this time, I worked for the Missouri Department of Conservation, and I got a Fish and Wildlife Service grant through the unit that I work for now back then. So in 2019, we applied for a competitive state wildlife grant. It's one of the few amazing federal grants that provides a large chunk of money to state partners and others, but you need that state contact. So we got this grant and it placed 60 MODIS stations across 8 Midwestern states and 3 countries, Mexico, Costa Rica, and Colombia, working with international partners. Had 10 partners on the grant, including 4 or 5 Midwestern states. So it really got a lot of new Midwest contacts involved in MODIS. And, people like Anna Buckard Thomas, that's at Iowa DNR, she has taken off after this grant and she's placed like 20 or 30 more MODIS stations in the state. So sometimes it was kind of cool to give them a little chunk of money and get them enticed by MODIS. And, that's best case when somebody just takes off and becomes a MODIS advocate of their own. One objective of this grant we got was for the Missouri Department of Conservation and Selva, which is a bird conservation nonprofit located in Bogota, Colombia, South America. I had met Nick Bailey in the center there. He's their director of migration ecology. I met him through the Missouri Department of Conservation through a Southern Wings project, which is a way for state agencies to give money to their migratory bird conservation efforts on the non-breeding grounds. So I met him through the years at Partners in Flight meetings, and then met Paz Irola, who's on the left. She is one of the Selva partners in Costa Rica. And then this is Ernesto on the right. He just wasn't in our picture, but he's essential to that Costa Rica team as well. And one of the objectives of this grant was to place 25 MODIS tags on wood thrush and 25 MODIS tags on golden wing warbler. And we were going to tag them on the wintering grounds before they left on spring migration, hoping that because we had more MODIS stations up here on the breeding grounds and in between, that we would have a greater probability of getting detections of birds as they move north on spring migration. So that's what we did. For wood thrush, I'm just going to cover wood thrush today. We from those 25 MODIS tagged wood thrush, tagged on the wintering grounds, you see down in their places of origin at the bottom in Costa Rica and Nicaragua. We got 8 pretty solid spring northerly tracks you can see in green, the more westerly tracks, and about 3 tracks south in yellow the following fall. We saw general migratory connectivity to the northeastern states and southeastern Canada. So that's telling us that the birds overwintering in Costa Rica and Costa Rica and Nicaragua, you can see are going right to the northeastern states or southeastern Canada, and that's the connection between their breeding and overwintering populations there. So that's what I say when I say migratory connectivity is pairing up breeding and non-breeding populations so that we can better plan for conservation. Kind of like we want to know which populations may be breeding in the northern forest so that we can target maybe international work or work for migratory species on the non-breeding sites and know where to put that money to get the biggest bang for our conservation buck. Okay, so we got pretty good tracks from just this small sample, which was the point of doing a small sample on these 2 species. So we thought, great, that's wonderful. What would happen? This is Nick and I scheming at Selva. We're like, it led us to consider what would happen if we deployed tags more broadly across the entire non-breeding range, not just at these 2 sites in Costa Rica and Nicaragua. And then it grew from there, probably from my insanity and excitement about it. And then we thought, well, what if we deployed tags across the entire breeding range as well? So that's what we did. So I am coordinating the breeding season side of things in the north, and Selva is coordinating all of the non-breeding tagging in the south. And we're tagging birds across their entire breeding range and entire wintering range. And you can see our northern forest states and Ontario are also participating in that. As you can imagine, our research questions for this project are many since it's such a large scale project. They include these. I'm not going to read through all of them, but I'll just touch on a few. Again, how do we link those breeding and wintering populations through the annual cycle so that we can better target conservation? How do survival rates vary? We asked all participants tagging wood thrush to tag them within range of an active MODIS station. So we wanted movements and potentially survival movements before the birds left on migration. That means that much of our data, if the bird is truly within range of a station daily, that these tags send out a pulse every 15 seconds. So we have about 4 or 5 months of birds with 15-second pulses being recorded for that long before they even left on migration. And these tags last over a year. So we have a lot of data. Uh, but because birds were tagged within range of an active Motus station, we're hoping they return in the spring and get pinged again. So we're able to look at interannual survival, which is kind of difficult with a lot of these migratory species of this size. Do population-specific differences exist in migratory timing and routes? And that can inform us to protect habitat and have that there during certain times of year for these species. For this species, how are population trends correlated? How can we focus conservation actions? Again, we always want to go back to conservation and how this is informing management and informing that where wood thrush appear to need it the most. So if we can kind of hone in on some of these migration routes and try and maintain those forest tracks where they're using them, that's very important. What can departure dates and migration potentially tell us about habitat quality? There's a lot of studies of migration tracking talking about habitat quality, how long a bird stays in a chunk of habitat, and whether that's indicating that it's high quality or lower quality, things like that. Again, conservation implications. I think this work will help us to focus conservation actions and land protections of forest tracks that these birds are using. I think it'll build clearer ties between the breeding and non-breeding populations, like I just talked about, programs with the states through Southern Wings, maybe your network at the Northern Forest, trying to figure out, I'm sure where your other species of interest are overwintering is very important. I've heard Jamie talk about that. I know you guys are discussing that. And then I think states and provinces really have buy-in. A big piece of this that in the ornithological world, I'm sure you've heard of it, called co-production, of trying to bring in states and land management partners from the very beginning of an idea. Oftentimes, I know from working as a state person, I'm sure many of you do land management and conservation at different levels. Oftentimes we hear about the results of a study and we're just told, hey, you should do something with this, do conservation with this, manage land according to our research, go. Or maybe the researcher doesn't even tell anyone doing land management. They just put it out in the literature and expect land managers to peruse the literature. Well, that's not happening. And that's no criticism to land managers, but they just have a million things to do. It's just not feasible. So a big part of this project has been drilling into people's heads, right? That it's informing management, informing conservation, and in my view, communicating findings of our science and research to land managers is just as important as having those findings published. Because what's the point, right? If they're not reaching the folks doing the work on the ground. So I think, when I pitched this to mostly state agencies, but there's lots of NGOs participating, including American Bird Conservancy and lots of other NGOs and partners across the range. But I originally pitched it to state agencies. I think state agencies are wildly underutilized as partners in research projects. So I presented at the Atlantic Flyway Non-Game Bird Tech section and the Mississippi Flyway Non-Game Bird Tech section, and kind of pitched it as if you guys can find, $7,000, a relatively, feasible amount of money to pay for 25 tags for your state, and you find taggers that are permitted by the Bird Banding Lab to deploy the tags in your state because they know those contacts much better than any of us, we can do something really big together. And a lot of people signed up to do it, which is very exciting. So across that map you saw with the yellow stars, we have about 60 permitted taggers to tag wood thrush for this project in particular. Selva and I wrote a common protocol and methods. We're making sure that everybody is using the same tag harness type, the same tag harness materials, field methods, data sheets, data management. We want everybody to be doing things the same. We communicated a lot through the breeding season on what was working for people target netting wood thrush, what wasn't working, trying to walk people through that so everybody could be successful. We closely coordinated with the Bird Banding Lab. Everybody who wanted to tag wood thrush for this project in particular had to go through me, and then I had to give those names to the Bird Banding Lab to try and kind of green light those folks so that we kind of controlled it a little bit. And then, just lots of little partnerships where here in Missouri, we have a Missouri Conservation Heritage Foundation. It's a small NGO, and they pooled funds from a lot of state partners for very low overhead so that we could make big tag purchases all at once and they wouldn't have to deal with that. Our Region 3 folks held a Fish and Wildlife Service banding workshop for people to participate in this project in particular. So folks convened in Kentucky, thanks to our Kentucky DNR partners who helped us host that workshop last summer. And then we paid for and flew in tagging trainers from Birds Caribbean and from Pennsylvania who'd done a lot of these trainings and just folks I know through the Motus network. So it's very cool. Yeah. So these are just what you all came for, I'm sure, is pictures of being in the field because it's much more fun than talking about research questions and looking at Motus maps. But we captured birds using mist nets and conspecific playback and calls. We fitted birds with a low-tech nano tag, Motus digitized tag. We used a figure-8 leg loop harness you see there in the middle, and we cinched up a little jewelry crimp and crimped it, and then put a little dab of super glue on the crimp to hold it in place. We put those little figure-8s around their legs, and they sit in the little in their little haunches right here. I know there's probably a scientific term for that's not haunch. It's been a long week, and we worked with our Columbia Public Schools here. I'm in Columbia, Missouri, and they had a 3D printer. So we 3D printed scaled down American robins and we painted them like wood thrush. You can see in the bottom right. The left one is the decoy, guys, and the one on the right is the real bird. I know it's very hard to tell the difference. It's the stick that gives it away, I know. There's a bird being released in Illinois with partners there at Illinois Natural History Survey. We aged and sexed and banded the birds. We aged them using plumage. We put a federal band on all birds. They had to meet a weight threshold, so we didn't exceed the 3% body weight for the tag. And then it was just really cool to see pictures come in from all over the place, from lots of different states and partners, taking pictures of tagging wood thrush across the eastern US. Yeah, it's just that part was extra fun. And so this is what we achieved. This is just the first year of breeding season tagging. So we tagged birds in breeding season 2024. We're going to tag them again this coming breeding season 2025. And then our partner Selva again is tagging. They just wrapped that up this week to tag on the wintering grounds. So in breeding season 24, between May and July, 24 states in Ontario deployed about 590 wood thrush Motus tags across their breeding range. The filtered data, there were 32 million lines of data just from the breeding season through fall migration. We have to filter out a lot of false positive, not a lot, but a handful of false positives that Motus can just naturally make. So you have to go through every single species, every single individual's track to make sure that there aren't any false positives in there. And then Selva has deployed about 120 tags again that just wrapped up a few days ago across 5 countries on the wintering grounds. These are not beautiful maps, but this winter I've been cleaning the data and again removing those false positives that can slip through the Motus filters. So that again means you have to hand check every single individual to make sure that you don't see detections like states away or just really improbable tracks where one day the bird's 3 states away, the next day it's back. That is very obviously a false positive. So these maps are not pretty because they're diagnostic plots pumped out using R code. But they're kind of cool to show the detections of some of the birds that we tagged on the breeding season as they move through on fall migration. So on the left, the red star is where the bird was originally tagged and the tag was deployed. You can see there in the center plot in Minnesota that bird did not get a detection while it was on the breeding grounds. It wasn't potentially within range of that Motus station, which is fine. We asked people to do the best they could, and a lot of this is kind of proof of concept of how far a bird can be detected, in a forest with topography. A lot of these birds are nesting down in draws, and so you don't get those daily movements, but we got great movements as it moves south through Missouri through our Motus station array. And there's just, the one on the right is from Camp Ripley, where my supervisor, Andy Forbes, tagged 25 birds and just great track south, right? We got like 12 detections on different stations, so that's what we like to see. Very exciting. Hopefully we'll get tracks as the birds move back up north on spring migration. Here's a few more that are just really exciting. Not sure if this Athens, Georgia detection is legit or not. We'll have to look at the timing on that, but could be. And then, yep, just lots of good tracks from Minnesota. Moving through Iowa and Missouri through that. It's very validating to see these detections going through Missouri because you're like, yes, all that. All the station placements were for a reason. And then we got some really cool tracks across the eastern US as well, along the Atlantic coast. The Motus network in the Northeast is so robust that you get a lot of great detections. This is a bird tagged in Maine. This northerly detection is probably not legit. So things like this, where you just got to look through and see what detections look plausible and which not. And then you can also look at signal strength. At each station that the bird was detected on. So this is bird 88825. These are the signal strength plots for that same bird. As this is where the bird was tagged, and as it moves south, pinging these stations, this is where the bird was tagged. You see daily detections here. Something went wrong with our station that was not online for a month, but then it came back on and worked again. But you can see the date that this bird left, and you can see that the signal strength kind of waned as the bird flew off. So this is a pretty clear departure signal on a Motus station showing that if you zoomed into that minute that that bird left, it was probably in the evening because that's when a lot of our birds get up to migrate. So you can zoom into the minute here and see different arcs and different detection signals, which is amazing. And then it moved by Columbia, at station here where I'm located. So it hopped up in the air, got detected on Columbia as it moved past Jefferson City, 35 miles south of here, moved past another station in our Ozarks, and then a few days later went past the one station in Minnesota or in Mississippi, which is pretty wild. So this just a zoom in of a few hours on of signal strength on this is a different Motus station. This is a Motus station here. So you can see this kind of parabola shape of the signal strength very strong. It gets weaker and then it gets strong again because when a bird's flying up to a station, the antennas are placed horizontally, and so the signal strength from the ping on the tag is very strong as it approaches the station. It passes over like the butts of the antenna where you don't get good detection, and then it flies past the next antenna, or it flies past the antenna where it's in good range again. So that's just kind of a flyby signature from a Motus station, just to give you a little really fun, nerdy behind the scenes stuff about Motus. I know you're excited. These are just a few stations down in Belize that had 18 unique wood thrush from the whole project detected on just these two stations in Belize. So it just shows you the importance of these stations down on the non-breeding grounds as well, because a lot of these birds are moving at the same time. They're clumping up and moving together from a lot of different states. This is again just a really ugly map that helps me to visualize some of this stuff using diagnostics. So the red stars are where the tags were deployed, and then all of the blue dots are all the detections from the project as the birds move south. The dash lines show very quick movements, so they're in theory like straight line movements, not a stopover or the bird wasn't staying there for, a day or a long time. And then these are just lines drawn between all of those detections. This is just starting to show us a little bit about migratory connectivity. So it's showing that the birds tagged down here, or that are detected down here, were tagged, mostly in the eastern third of the breeding range, right? These in Belize are coming from all over the place. So that's very interesting as well, that they're maybe hopping the Gulf as a group and being detected in the same place. We're not sure where they're going down here once they're on the wintering grounds, but that's why we're detecting birds on the wintering side as well, so that we can see where they're going from that side north too. And then our next steps are many. Of course, we're right in the thick of the project. We've only gone through two, I guess, field seasons so far out of three. And so we're going to continue updating every time we download data from the Motus website. There's always more partners that have uploaded data from their Motus stations, the ones that aren't on the cell network that transmit the detections. So a lot of those data can just be banked on a station until someone uploads them to the Motus website. So every few months when we download the data, there's always new detections. It's hard to know when to stop and actually analyze a set of data because there's more coming in all the time. So we're going to look at a lot of these different questions that I talked about earlier. Yeah, I won't go into this too much because I don't want to go over time, but another piece of this that I talked about before is survival. And so we reached out to, all the states participating in the project, and we said, if you have the capacity to go search your breeding territories where you tag birds and you have a Motus receiver with a handheld antenna, This was during the winter after the birds had already left. We said for your states that don't have, for your birds that don't have any southerly detections after they've left the breeding grounds, they didn't have any tracks, they didn't have any detections on fall migration, go back to your breeding territories where you tag these birds and scan for the tags. Well, about six or seven states did that for their maybe two, three, four birds that they didn't have detections for after the breeding season, and we found like three or four tags in the leaf litter because the tag is still emitting. Oftentimes, the ones we find, of course, are still emitting. There may be others that may have gotten crunched, but a predator would have to uh, crunch a tag really hard, and a lot of the predators that may be going after a wood thrush, I don't know that they could crush it very easily or want to, since it doesn't taste good. But they found three or four tags in the leaf litter right in the breeding territory where the bird was tagged. And so we're going to see if we can parse out whether those were mortalities or whether they were dropped tags. Um, but with our harness attachment, I doubt that many of those are being dropped, especially with kind of a bird this size where you can really fit that tag very well as opposed to a very small warbler. We're preparing for 2025 field work. We have over 500 more tags committed that states are going to deploy. So we're probably going to have a project with a lot of tags, guys. There's a lot of people putting out. It's a lot of data. We're probably gonna have like 1,100 tags on wood thrush across both sides of their range, which is very exciting and overwhelming at the same time. I just want to show you some pictures of the non-breeding range tagging by our Salva partners. So again, this is Paz Irola, and this is Ernesto Carmen. They're a great team. They're down in Costa Rica, and this is them in Guatemala. Part of Selva's approach to bird conservation is capacity building, which is awesome. And it's been a really big part of their participation in this wood thrush project is holding two or three Motus workshops. One was in Honduras, one was in Costa Rica, and they invited people from nearby countries to come to these Motus workshops to build capacity because everywhere we do Motus, we need people who know how to place a station, how to place the tag on a bird. So they go through all of that training about all of those very different, diverse things, like communications equipment and antennas and how to put up a receiver. Also, how to trap the birds, how to put um, these harnesses on, which is a skill all to itself. So every time we do a project like this, Selva is very adamant about training people wherever they go so that they're building up a huge cohort of researchers that can use this work in the future. They're building up partnerships they can call on to do large scale projects like this. And so whenever they tag birds, there's always other people there learning from them, which is very cool. So this tagging was happening at Tikal. I don't know if you've heard of Tikal. It's like a Mayan World Heritage site, and they placed a Motus station there with partners earlier this year. And this is where they tag birds. They didn't put the Motus station on the structures, don't worry, but it's there at the site at Tikal. These are a few other pictures of that tagging. The picture on the right is them tagging birds in Costa Rica, where they're from, after, some really big rains. I can't imagine tromping through the forest like that, like thigh high in water, trying to trap wood thrush in that. But this is the type of habitat where wood thrush spend the winter, really thick, kind of like our forests, except they're tropical. It's very cool to see these birds on the wintering grounds in tropical forests. It's just kind of mind blowing. They also, I will say, this is Pause, and she has never heard a wood thrush sing because wood thrush don't sing on the wintering grounds. And so when we went down there to tag birds, I think in 2022, she told us that we were trying to tag those 25 birds that were part of our pilot. And she said she's never heard a wood thrush sing, which is just so heartbreaking. She's heard a recording, of course, but she hasn't heard one in real life. So we're trying to get her up here over the last few years, trying to get her up here so we can take her out to hear wood thrush on the breeding grounds. Here's just more pictures. This is Paz and Ernesto in Honduras, training up this individual. I forget his name, but he was helping band and helping to put the tags on, and he became someone who can do it in the future, which is amazing. They put up some stations. This is them placing a really hefty Motus station. Usually they just put antennas on top of a building, but they put up their own kind of small telephone pole here to put up a Motus station. So it's pretty cool. Okay, that's really what I have for today. I'd be happy to take any questions if we have time and appreciate your attention.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I just think that's crazy she hasn't heard a wood thrush sing because, like, when you're out tagging in the breeding grounds, that's all
I
you listen
know.
to for a whole day and you
I
dream
know.
about it.
I know. It's kind of sad, you know. I've sent her videos of it and it just feels mean, but yeah,
Yeah, I hope you get her up here to hear it in the real life.
me too.
So my first question, and I'll let others chime in or raise your hand or throw a question in the chat or discussion thoughts. Do you need help? Like, what do you like? If there is anything
So,
that we can help you with, like, do you need more partners or funding? Like, I'm curious on like what your needs are to go into that next phase of the project, if any at all.
no, Jamie, that's such a great question. I never get asked that question of how do you need help? That's such a good question. Yes, I always need help. Everybody in Modus always needs lots of help.
Hmm.
I think I think it's a few fold here. Oftentimes, God, I love this question. Oftentimes I get a question of like, okay, well, what bird should we tag? And people, it's like they didn't listen to the first part and they just want to do the tagging, which is great. I'm glad that people are so excited about it.
Hmm.
Um, but I think a big need that we have is capacity of people who can place stations.
Hmm.
That's a massive need. And I recognize that that requires training. And so over the past year, you know, my supervisor Andy and I have talked about trying to host a station placement workshop or training where we invite partners across an area or state or few states or, you know, our whole Midwest region to come to a central location and do what we did today. Learn about Modus, learn about what types of coax cable you need and fitting and fittings and how to place them and what, you know, equipment you need to attach them to certain size poles or how to put them on top of a building. And you know, with Modus, it always depends. You know, it's a learning curve. And so it does take some time. You know, most of us are biologists and we don't have a background in communications equipment or know exactly how that works, but it's not rocket science and we can easily train people on that stuff. So that is one need is to try and build up, I think, these little pockets or these little cohorts of people who, when we get contacted about, hey, we have the funding to do a Modus station by our small NGO. What do we do? What do we need to do? What do we order? How do we do that? It would be nice to have a few more people that we could call on um, to help them regionally. I'm down here in Missouri. I can't travel around and I don't have the time to like walk people through that type of stuff. So that is certainly a need. Um, if your CDN or other folks have interest in ever like going after a grant, I know grant funding is kind of confusing right now and we're not sure what will occur in the future. With funding sources, I would always keep it in your mind that if you do want to do Modus tagging or tracking or anything like that, put in some money for a coordinator or for someone who can like head that up or maybe place more stations. I would always keep in mind also to try and place more stations on the wintering grounds. You know, Nick and Selva have all those contacts across many of those countries. So if in the future you guys have interest in tagging birds in the northern forest or trying to make those connections between non-breeding sites, we can certainly hook you up with, you know, people in those areas to try and get some of that stuff on the ground.
Hmm.
So that's the one that always comes to mind first. You know, funding for more stations is always important too. That Modus receiver map with the yellow dots, that's live on the Modus website. It's just under receiver locations. If you Google it, you can find it too. Um, and trying to find those huge gaps, the huge holes in that network, and trying to, you know, contact local partners. Your network here is great of people who I'm sure work a lot of different places.
Hmm.
Maybe they know of a building or an old abandoned tower or somewhere they could put up a mast, like a metal pole on a building or anything, and place a Motus station. You guys are going to know those sites better than I. So it takes a village. It takes many villages, right, to do Motus because it's so collaborative. But we can get you some of the support you need if you're willing to kind of do some of the legwork on the ground, which is really what we need. You know, we saw in there Minnesota only has 19 towers, right? And it's a
Hmm.
big state, big stations, not towers. It makes people think we need like a cell tower, and we don't. Really, you can put antennas anywhere high up. So that
Yeah.
comes to mind first, I guess.
Yeah, I think the last time we talked about Motus Towers in Minnesota, there's a gap on the west side, which is a huge migratory flyway
Right.
for like waterfowl and such. So,
I mean, let's
um,
be honest, anywhere in the Midwest is a huge migratory flyway.
yeah.
I mean, And when we were putting up stations in 2018, way back in the day before, when the whole Midwest was pretty much empty, we had to wait a few seasons to get one or two detections. Now you put up a Motus station nearly anywhere in the country and you're getting like 10 to 20 detections the next migratory season. It's wild. Like it's a lot easier to get the buy-in and excitement and get people bought into it now as opposed to back then when we're like, we got one bird, we're like super excited. And I was emailing
Yeah.
everybody in the department, but now that proof of concept is a little bit easier to yeah, to show.
Yeah. It's really fun to see this project come, like, it's just like from the beginning and kind of starting to get those tags. And like, see, we helped Andy tag in
Yeah,
Camp Ripley. And then it's like, oh, like, check tomorrow. Like, they're in Iowa. Oh, look, they're down
I
in
know.
Missouri. Like,
I
it's
know.
really neat to see it live. And I really appreciate you sharing those graphs today
Yeah.
because I haven't checked in for a while. But
Yeah, and that's what does it, Jamie, is this like this connection to the birds, and just working in full annual cycle work with international partners and with other folks, like the birds are bringing us together, right? Because they're
yeah.
migratory and we have to care about both places. And
Mhm.
meeting these partners that you see in these pictures, we like WhatsApp message each other all the time when we're in the field or when we see species that the other one knows. And
Yeah.
it builds these bonds and these partnerships like this one, that just bring people together. It's just really cool.
Yeah.
It's really neat.
I love it. Chris, go ahead. Nice to see you.
I'm gonna try here. Okay. Hi there. Hey, Sarah.
Hi. Hey.
So this maybe only get a partial answer off of this. So right now you've only collected basically half of your data because these birds haven't migrated back north yet.
Mhm.
But what kind of goal or what did you envision having for return rates on these tags when you started? And then how are things looking right now? Like, have
Mm.
you far exceeded what you were hoping to? I mean, you have 589 birds tagged,
Yeah.
you said.
Yeah.
So not necessarily percentages, but just
Yeah.
is it looking like better than what you anticipated
Yeah,
or
no,
maybe
that's a
what you
great
expected?
question. No, that's good. I've never gotten that question about this project. Good job, Chris. Um, yeah, it is better than I anticipated. And I'm not sure I didn't have like a goalpost really to like a goal to hope for. We knew that with a project this large, and especially in certain parts of the US where the Motus network is very robust, we knew we would get a lot of detections. Um, I talked about filtering out false positives. I think out of the 589 birds, we have 490, so about I don't know percentage, but about 85% of all birds that were deployed with a tag have a Motus detection south of where they were tagged, which is pretty great. Out of 590 tags, only 100 of them don't have a detection yet. But that's the thing is yet. We I guess if I guess first blush, if you looked at that, you'd be like, well, 100 of them died or 100 of them just didn't fly within range of the station. But it's not over yet. I mean, those tags conservatively have a life of 480 days. And so that's conservative. Low tech doesn't give you a longevity for that tag unless it's usually more than that because they're selling a product that it needs to be guaranteed for 480 days. So some of those tags may last like up to 2 years, or at least a year and a half. Um, and so that's pretty wild. So we had a lot just from breeding going down on migration. And so hopefully we'll get more of those as they come back up north. Um, that's the tough part about Motus is figuring out that survival piece. But there are a lot of people a whole lot smarter than me who have analyzed a lot of Motus data and they've like put the country or the hemisphere into latitudinal bands as like survival markers and survival models. And so they're saying like, oh, if a bird was got a detection in this band, that's survival a one, not a zero. If it made it up to the next one and was detected, that's, the same thing. And they tie that to temporal variables and weather variables and things like that to look at survival. And so we're going to be pursuing funding in the future for a postdoc and folks like that who, again, are much smarter than me. I can analyze the basic stuff and teach myself about that, but I think we're going to be able. This is going to be a huge opportunity with a lot of data for many researchers after us to access in the future to look at things like that, like survival. So it's gone pretty well just in that first migratory movement. So we'll see after spring.
Awesome. Hey, I'm trying to recall, were the birds also color banded?
So
So as
some of
far
the
as
state
reciting them?
Yeah, some of the state partners did color ban and some didn't. I did, Andy did, a few other states did. Folks mostly who thought they could go back to the site and try and recite them the next year. So um, we try to be very open with states about that. We were letting people participate across a gradient of how much time they could put in. Um, we have to be really lax like that, or at least flexible with a project this large. And so, yeah, some people did color band. I'm going to try and find the time to go back to all the breeding territories where I tagged birds last year. I won't be tagging at all of those same sites. I'm going to different sites, but I'm going to try and go back to those territories, find the wood thrush, and see if they're the color banded birds. Hopefully, we'll have Motus detections of those species, but it would be nice to go back and, if a tag died or is a dud or, whatever, and we can recite that bird or the tag fell off somehow. Yeah, I want to try and do that for sure. Thanks for your questions.
Any other questions? Sarah, I'm wondering if you have an example of using Modus for conservation. So, like, how in the past, with your many years of experience, have you used Modus to like has a state gone and preserved a piece of land because of different
So
pathways?
I think this project is a large proof of concept of that
Hmm.
approach. I mean, all the tagging that I've been part of as part of this competitive state wildlife grant, we started with those 25 tags also on golden wings, which I know are
Yep,
a little bit more applicable to you guys. I probably should have presented on that. Just kidding. But we have a
that's okay.
publication in review right now with Nick as the lead author on it. And
Hmm.
after that first year of 25 tags, we got okay tracks of that bird moving north as well. So the following spring, we put out 50 tags with a big group of people that we took down to Costa Rica, and we tagged those 50 birds across a gradient of precipitation and forest cover, trying to get at habitat quality and how long birds were staying when they were leaving. And so we were able to really drill down to see that some of the adult cohorts, as opposed to first year males, were leaving at very different times. Some of the birds that were the first to leave or the last to leave caught up with the birds that were the first
Hmm.
to leave, maybe because they were in higher quality habitat. They were able to bulk up and put more fat on, so they were able to go farther faster and catch up with those birds that had to leave earlier. So there's a lot of those pieces that are adding to the literature. As far as targeting conservation, we're learning a lot about where these birds are going, which pathways they're taking, and where the stopover sites are. That's the big part of Motus that it's told us, especially with Swainson's thrushes and some of these other projects. When Camila Gomez tagged those Swainson's thrushes, those 180 Swainson's thrushes in Colombia, she was not tagging them from their wintering location. She was tagging them because they were at a stopover site in an area very abundant with berries that Swainson's thrushes are eating in a montane, very forested part. And they were staying there 2 or 3 weeks just to fatten up before they made that big jump
Hmm.
across the Caribbean and the Gulf. So um, stopover sites, I think, are just as important, right? And we're serving that as the Ozarks. You guys are serving that as birds are coming down from the boreal. And so that's a big piece of this too, is with the golden wing tagging, as the birds move north, we found 2 or 3 different week-long stopovers in our Ozarks just by those latitudinal detections, right? A
Oh,
bird
wow.
was detected south of us or in our Ozarks. A week later, it's detected in Minnesota as it gets closer to the breeding grounds. And so
Hmm.
we're able to kind of parse that out. That's what I was talking about. Every Motus project just adds another piece to that puzzle. But we're trying to answer a lot of questions all at once on a
Yeah.
project this big, on a scale this large. So um, there have been little piecemeal things like that we need to do a better job of communicating to managers and the land management public. And we
Hmm.
certainly expect to do that with this project, trying to get at like routes and telling people, hey, X percentage or this population of wood thrush are going right through your state in this area. Protection of this is very important. Maybe put it in your state wildlife action plan. Maybe
Hmm.
make it part of your conservation planning. So things like that.
Yeah, for sure. That's good to know. you say you would want to present a golden wing for this group, but wood thrush is one of our 22 species for our
Right.
northern
Yeah.
forest priority, and it's more of like that closed canopy,
Right.
higher structural diversity when our golden wing is in our young successionals. So
Right.
I
Yeah.
always like to cover all of the biodiversity we have in the Northwoods,
Yeah.
and
Great.
even though I know it like I think wood thrush is on its like northern fringe in
Yeah.
BCR 12, but it's still, I mean,
Still there.
it
Yeah.
covers quite a few other species that we can't find any information or like they're, those smaller warblers.
Yep.
So,
Yep. Yeah, it's a good kind of umbrella species like that in a lot of
hmm
ways, you know. And wood thrush is checking a lot of different boxes. You know, if you tag a golden wing there in your picture, that tag only lasts one migratory movement, a few
hmm
months. Whereas a wood thrush is just bulkier and larger. They're common enough that people know their song, they know where to find them, they can target net them really well because they're really easy to target net. They're
Yeah.
kind of a species that kind of checks all the boxes. A lot of people ask me, well, what's the next species to do this with? And it's a difficult question to answer because, first of all, you always got to go by research question. Well, which species are you interested in learning more
Yeah.
about and targeting conservation rather than the other way around? But
hmm
wood thrush are convenient in that they're common enough that a lot of people can capture them across the whole range as opposed to, less common, more threatened
Right.
warbler, that's hard to find. So
hmm Chris, go ahead. She's got another question
go for it.
or comment.
Full of them. Males or females, which one did you get more tags placed on?
Males for sure. They're a lot more responsive to playback. Most people did tagging the last week of May, first week of June, first few weeks of June, and so females were sitting tight on nests, incubating. Um, and so we saw that a lot. I mean, I didn't start to see pairs of birds coming up to respond to playback until July, early July or mid-June when they'd had time to, get off the nest. We this is just an anecdote, but at one place we were tagging, we put a net up along this slope, hoping to get the bird coming up from the draw into the net. And when we were taking the net down after like 20 minutes of intermittent, trying to capture this bird, we saw the female on the nest, and she was like 20 feet from the nest the whole time, doing playback, netting, setting up the net right next to her, taking it down. She never moved. She's just like the tightest sitting on the nest. Like she was just like, don't move the whole time. And then we were like, oh great, we'll put the net back up and we'll flush her off the nest into the net because we really need females. We need more females tagged. And oh my God, we set up this net in like what we thought was the perfect spot. We put it up higher. We had extendable poles to put it up closer to the nest. We walked up to her with branches from the side that didn't have the net, trying to flush her off. And we were like touching her with the leaves on our branches. And she's just sitting there like, don't even try it. I know what you're up to. And then when she flushed, she flew over our branches, over our head. And we were just like, so. Sometimes flushing the female off the nest did not work at all. So we definitely have way more males than females. We're going to try and get a
That's
few
funny.
more females and juveniles this year. We didn't get very many juveniles either. I think people were very nervous about catching their quota of birds, so they wanted to do it really fast in the beginning of the field season. But these birds are still responsive. I caught a bird August 3rd. Who was not singing, right? These birds kind of stop singing in July, and you think they're gone because you just don't hear them anymore. But before that, they're sing, 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 sing so consistently. And then when it gets hotter later in the season, maybe they have young, they just stop singing. So like the forest is silent of wood thrush for 2 months, 2, 3 months. But I went back out there in August to try and find this tag where this bird had escaped from my hand before I tightened the harness on it. So it flew off. Before I'd tightened the tag, so I thought for sure, the tag was dropped. And it was, and we found it on the ground, and we recaptured the bird to put it back on. But yeah, this bird responded and flew into the net on August 3rd. So that gave me a little bit more confidence that we can try for juveniles later in the season and that they will respond. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, so I obviously have a little bit of that insider information, right? That you've requested to change that weight threshold
Yeah.
or that percentage there. So um that obviously is going to make a big difference. Otherwise, without that, would you be able, without adjusting from 3 to 5, would you have been able to take any juveniles, or they haven't bulked up enough
It depends.
to
Yeah.
tag them?
I didn't trap. I didn't trap any juveniles last year to know about their weights. The weight is very interesting. We did increase the weight threshold from 3% to 4 or 5%. More of the southern birds in the southern part of the range are lighter weight. And so my goal was to tag 40 birds in Missouri. I had to capture 60 to tag 40 because 20 of them were too light. Um, and those were likely males that had just arrived on the breeding grounds. You know, when you're trying to miss net those guys before you do any playback, they are singing constantly. Just every breath, they're singing that song and flying from perch to perch and defending that territory when they first get on the breeding grounds. So I don't think they have time to eat, to fatten up when they first get there. So most of the releases I had to do without a tag on, which was just like major gut punch. Um, it was those first few weeks. But yeah, we had to release like, I guess not 20, but we had to release like 12 or 13 birds that were just 1 or 2 grams underweight, which was just like real heart-wrenching. So, and that only happened in the southern part of the range. Yep, people had to release a handful of birds. Yep.
Oh, thank you so much, Sarah. I love
Yeah.
this like little field stories at the end here. It's so great. I appreciate you giving our network an overview of the Wood Thrush and Motus project. I'm really excited to see the outlook as we move into
Yeah.
the migration of the spring. So thank you so much for your time, and everybody, thanks for attending. If you have any questions, I'll send out Sarah's email, and if you have a place to put a Motus tower up, I'm sure she'll be excited to hear it. So,
Great. Thanks, guys, for coming.
yeah,
Appreciate it.
thank you.
Thanks,
Have a great
Jamie.
afternoon.